And we were discussing floods and how it impacts the people who are more vulnerable with Abhyakaram a few weeks ago. And she mentioned about how people with disabilities, they suffer a lot. So as women and children as well. तो इसके बारे में कुछ बताएं?
When we talk about vulnerable communities, it's women, it's children, it's old people, it's people with disabilities, it's transgendered. And again, in this group, there's a subgroup. So they're women, they are single women, they are divorced women, they are pregnant women, they are lactating women, they're different categories. So when you're talking about women, we have to look at the spectrum of women. Women of reproductive age, young girls who are in the reproductive age, you have to think about that. Older women, so a woman who is 34 or a woman who's 18 and a woman who's 65 or 70, they will all have different needs. And perhaps older women would also need to have an attendant. They would need someone to help them go to the washroom, someone to change their clothes. Just look at the dynamics of this. This group of women, it's also very diverse. It is very unique in its own age groups and subset of problems. And then we talk about children. Are they infants? Are they toddlers? What age groups are they in? Have they been immunized? Are they being breastfed? All those factors have to play in when you're planning an emergency or disaster response. Older people, older men, older women, they have different needs. They have different ways to go to the washroom. They have just their whole subset of health problems are different from children and women. And then transgendered people, do they have protection? Are they safe? Do people in the communities accept them? Even in this hour of turmoil, how do we react to them? Minorities, that's another thing. That's also a vulnerable group. That how do we cater to minorities, especially in Pakistan and Sindh, where a lot of areas that were affected, they were Hindu majority areas. So did the attitude of people change while giving them help? Because let's face it, we are not the most tolerant nation, and there is a lot of still discrimination and perhaps misconceptions and perception and just overall intolerance with minorities. So in emergencies, do we set aside those differences or do they come in the foreplay while you're giving humanitarian aid? So this set of groups, these vulnerable groups, they are of course the most important because they will face the burden of disease. So for instance, simple example, when someone's coming to give you aid or there's a food truck which is supposed to give you food, it's generally the able-bodied men who will go and who will stand in line if there are men in that family. So they get the first task of standing in line, queuing up or running after the food truck or just standing there for hours and hours until they get help. If men are not there, it's the women who are going to face this burden. And then with women, look at the context. You have the parda, which we, generally people in this area do. It's a fact. So how do we segregate men and women? Will women want to sit with men? Do they want to stand separately? What are the conditions that we are giving humanitarian response to? What are the conditions in the shelter? And that's a huge question that's come up, that when the flood happened and government set up these emergency shelters, which was basically just a camp with families and with basic charpais and beds, how were women kept safe, or what measures had been taken to keep women safe? Those are things to consider about. Did women have access to food? Women's washroom needs, health and hygiene, wash. That's a very important topic here. Because if you look at Sindh or the rural parts of the country, there's still human defecation, open latrines. Now imagine so many people clubbed together in a small area, there is no privacy. These are very realistic issues. So women face the double burden here. Not only taking care of their families, the survivors that are there, also they're the ones who are going to cook food, they're going to do all those domestic chores, whatever they can in that area, and still be the primary caregiver of their family members, and face these other set of issues as well. So they definitely are the most vulnerable, and that's why we say that there's a need for gender-based responsive mechanisms, or the policies you make in disaster response, in planning, look at through a gender lens. And I'm going to go further, look at through it from an aging lens as well. All of us are not going to be in a, not all of us are teenagers anymore. In the next 10 years, we'll be in a different age group. And those people, from 20 will be 30, 40, 60, 70, 80. Each age group has a very different need. So aging is another lens that we need to look at. Not all able-bodied men and women can run to safety. What are the old people going to do? Someone in a wheelchair, how are you going to... They can't go by themselves. You would need an attendant. You would need someone to go with them or take them there with someone. So they can't do this on their own. So gender responsiveness is important, or looking at through a different lens is very important in this whole context and debate.